Looking back, I suppose my family was always somewhat off target, not dysfunctional in the we're never speaking to each other kind of manner, but enough that the partiality was obvious. If you haven't figured it yet, Zach, 19, the younger sibling, is hardly the golden child. My older brother Ryan owns that title. Ryan's the kind of guy who simply doesn't seem to understand the idea of responsibility. He is 24 and has managed to sail through life as if he were playing easy mode. Jobs arrive and pass, mostly disappearing. Either he gets fired for showing up late one too many times or leaves since he's too good for it. Still, he never seems to worry about stability or finances, as my parents seem to constantly save the day. Me? He seems to have an unseen safety net solely for him. From 15, I have been grinding. From keeping shelves at the neighborhood grocery shop to delivering food solely to save money, I have done everything. I wanted not to be forced to spend my entire life working a dead-end career. I dreamed of my own company, something I had visioned for years. After years of scrimping, working late hours, and sacrificing every last bit of leisure time, I managed to save $37,000. Though it's not the point, let's pretend it's been my concentration for as long as I can remember. I made every cent, no shortcuts or handouts. That number made me really proud. For me, it was confirmation that I could create anything from nothing, not only money. I also assumed my folks would be pleased. Really, what parent would not be happy to see their child being responsible and working hard? Actually, mine weren't. It began roughly a month ago when Ryan realized he wanted a different flat. For years, he has been residing in this little but rather practical apartment. Although it was not opulent, it was more than he deserved since he hardly paid rent on time, if at all. But obviously, for him, that was insufficient now. He discovered this bright new apartment in a posh area of town, the kind of place one would expect someone with a real career to reside in. Surprising him, he lacked the funds for the deposit. When I originally learned about it, I gave it little thought. Why would this be my concern, really? Ryan is an accomplished, mature guy. If he wants something, he can work out how to get it right. Bad. One evening, my folks sat down with me. That alone seemed dubious. They never seat me for anything except an explosive drop. For a split second, I considered perhaps they might inquire how my business plans were performing, or thank you for my funds. What relevance had that had to me? Then it came. I blinked. We think it would be a good idea if you gave Ryan your savings. Wait, what? She looked at me as though I were the one acting irrationally. I smiled and said, he really needs this place. The money is just sitting in your account. It was not a ha-ha sort of laughter, more akin to you have to be kidding me chuckle. They were not very serious, certainly. My own savings? The $37,000 I had spent years working? With Ryan? For a flat he hardly needed? I don't think so, I said, my voice more pointed than I wanted. Ryan's been going through a tough time, my dad said, as if that explained everything. We as a family have to encourage one another. What's the big deal? You aren't using the money right now. The significant deal? The major problem was that I had worked assiduously for the money. I intended to have plans for that. Plans include Ryan not being bailed out for the umpteenth time. Your family, my mother said, her voice turning into full-on guilt trip mode. You should be willing to help. At that point, I was stunned rather than particularly upset. They were behaving as though this was natural, as though I had no voice in the matter. I sat there transfixed, and my dad dropped the shocking. If you're not willing to help your brother, he said, his tone icy, then maybe you should start looking for another place to live. What I was hearing seemed unbelievable. That evening, I stayed awake as they threatened to throw me out should I fail to deliver Ryan my money. Trying to understand what had just happened, my head whirled. Though I knew my folks preferred Ryan, this reached a whole fresh level. I had toiled for every dollar of that, and now I was being told I had to give it up, or lose my house. The next 4 days were misery. Not let down were my parents. They kept bringing it up at every chance, guilt-tripping me, pushing me, and making passive-aggressive remarks about my selfish behavior. Ryan, meanwhile, spoke hardly at all. I didn't know what to do. He just sat there scrolling on his phone, totally blind, or maybe indifferent, to the storm his new flat had created. Not enough saved to launch my company or move out. I got caught. One thing was certain, though. I was not handing them that money. And that's when things truly started to spiral. The days that followed resembled living in some warped form of my existence. Every contact with my parents became into a war of words, an endless attempt to make me cave. "It must be nice to have money and not worry about anyone else," he said when I went into the room. My mom played the loving but disappointed act, constantly reminding me that family helps one another. My dad took the quieter approach, tossing out little jabs here and there. It was relentless. One of them would bring up the conversation every time I felt it ended, and every time felt as though a stomach punch. Ryan, naturally, said little. I was battling for my sanity, not alone for my money. That, I believe, annoyed me the most. He was not defending himself nor volunteering to help find a solution. He was not sitting in on these debates. He was essentially thus there, watching TV, surfing his phone, behaving as though his existence wasn't exploding my universe. It disgusted me greatly. Part of me wanted to scream at him, shake him, and help him realize how much he was asking of me. Still, I neglected. Why is not clear to me. After a few days of being surrounded at every step, I decided I wanted a break. Maybe I was hoping my folks would come to their senses without losing my cool. Spoiler alert, they didn't. I began lingering late at school and hiding in the library to escape heading home. There was tranquility there, quiet, apart from the turmoil I would have found in my own house. Headphones in, I would sit in a corner trying to concentrate on homework or business plan development. Anything to divert me from the truth I would have to confront when I went through the door, but even that didn't last very long. Late one afternoon, I arrived home wondering whether I had missed their regular evening guilt session. Nope. I placed my suitcase on the floor, mentally preparing myself. My mom was waiting for me in the kitchen, arms crossed, her face set in that tight, frustrated expression I had come to dread. "We need to talk," she began, her voice shrill. "About what?" Even knowing exactly what was about to happen, I asked. "Ryan's apartment," she said. "She requires that money. Though we have been patient, this has gone on long enough to cause my chest to constrict once more." "Mom, I saved that money for my company as told. I'm not just going to hand it over." "You're being selfish," she replied with a frigid tone. "You have the means to aid your brother. He is struggling." Though there was nothing hilarious about the circumstances, I couldn't help myself from giggling if you were in his shoes. "Absolutely, Mom. Ryan is willing to assist me. Over his lifetime, he has never done anything for me. He barely cares enough to ask me personally." Her jaw tightened, and for a second I thought she might yell. "He's just sitting about waiting for you to offer him what he needs." She turned away instead, murmuring something about ungrateful kids and not understanding family. My dad, who had apparently been listening from the corridor, chose that moment to join the conversation. "Your mom's right," he said, crossing his arms like he was about to provide some very insightful analysis. "This goes beyond mere financial concerns. It's about family here." I stared at him, incredulity sweeping over me. "You are young. You do not yet understand, but occasionally you have to give up something for the people you love." I went back and raised my voice. "You're asking me to toss away my future so Ryan might live in a better apartment. That is fair, then?" Shrugging as if $37,000 were pocket change, he said, "You can save more money later." Ryan needs this now, though, and it was like talking to a wall. They didn't care what I said or how much I attempted to emphasize how hard I had worked for that money. Ryan was all that counted to them. He needed aid, and I was supposed to provide it. No amount of debating would be able to change their perspective. That evening, I came to see something. None of this would work. Ryan's troubles would be solved with my money, they had already concluded. And if I neglected to give it to them, they would follow through on their promise to kick me out. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to decide what to do. I kept my company ideas unaltered, but lacked enough money to afford rent and leave. One thing was obvious. I wasn't handing my friends my money. They lacked extra places for me to crash in, and I wasn't ready to raid my funds just to exist. Okay, if they wanted me gone, I could solve it. Better still than living under their home and being treated like an ATM for Ryan's poor choices. I started packing early the next morning, quietly and without creating a scene. Though I was done waiting for one, I did not yet have a plan. That place was beyond livable for me anymore. Every minute I spent there seemed like I was losing a bit more of myself. As I folded my things into a duffel bag, I heard my parents chatting in the kitchen. It was stifling. Although their voices were low, I got enough to realize they were talking about me. My mother sounded agitated, probably still attempting to guilt my dad into being the bad guy, thereby avoiding her having to. Ever the stoic one, my dad simply kept saying, "He has to learn." Learn what? That my diligence has little bearing on things? Does that family just operate in one direction? I tightened my hands and swallowed the rage that may have leaked over. All right, should they wish me gone, I would depart. But they were not carrying my savings with me. Packing my life while still residing in the same house was bizarre. Every time I passed my parents, I felt their gaze fixed on me, laden with disappointment, or perhaps resentment for still not caving. Though I knew what she meant, my mother would periodically say things like, "You don't have to do this, you know," or "We could still work something out." Working something out was just another way of saying, "Give us your savings." My dad said nothing, but the tension in the air whenever he was present was nearly smothering. He would be standing in the doorway while I moved boxes of my belongings, crossing his arms and gazing as though I was sinning some unboundedly. "You're really going through with this?" One evening at last he asked. I stopped, a box of clothing in hand, and gazed at him. "You're the ones who said I should leave if I wasn't going to help Ryan." He laughed. "We didn't mean it like that. How else could you have meant it?" I turned back, my voice sharper than I meant. "You made it pretty clear. Either I give you the money or I'm out," my dad said, just standing there shaking his head like I was the irrational one. Though I drunk it, I could feel the rage boiling up. Arguing no longer had any benefit. My mother came to my room the night before I was scheduled to leave. They had made their decision. I was making mine. Her red and swollen eyes matched her hours of crying. Her hands clenched in her lap, she sat down on the edge of my bed and said, "Zach," her voice almost above a whisper, "you are not going to have to go. We are family. We can work this out." I slumped down across from her. "Mom, I am not handing Ryan my savings. I have told you 100 times. She looked down, her lips barely visible. "That is the only solution you and Dad seem interested in." I briefly considered her perhaps at last acknowledging that this whole scenario was unfair. Rather, she said, "Your brother is going through a difficult period. He's having difficulty. We just assumed you would be willing to help." My chest tightened with annoyance. "Mom, I have been struggling too. Since I was 15, I have been working, saving every dollar I could. Nobody gave me any assistance. Nobody pulled me out of trouble. Ryan never lifted a finger to help himself. Why is it my obligation to mend things for him?" I shook my head, standing up, and she said simply, "Because he's your brother," as if that answered everything. "I'm done, Mom," she said. "Though I love you, I'm unable to continue." She said nothing else. She just sat there for a long minute, then got up and left the room. "I have worked too hard to let you and Dad shame me into giving it all up." I considered it perhaps marked the end of it. Naturally, though, it wasn't. My dad came outside the following morning as I was packing the rest of my belongings into my car. His tone softer than it had been in days, he added, "You don't have to do this, you know." I turned to face him, resting against the car door. He seemed tired instead of angry now. "Definitely yes, I do. If I stay, you will only keep pushing me, and I am not handing Dad the money." He groaned and ran a hand through his hair. "Not happening." "Zach, you'll regret this. One day when you're older, you'll know what it means to put family first." I tightened my jaw and bit back the reply just on my tip of tongue. Rather, I answered, "Maybe. But for now, I have to put myself first." I got in the car and left, felt like tearing off a bandage. It hurt, but there also was an unusual sensation of comfort. I felt for the first time in days, not as though guilt and manipulation were suffocating me. Although I had no idea what my next action was, at least I was in charge of my own life. For a few days, I crashed at my friend Jake's house as I worked through things. One night as we sat in his little living room, Jake, one of the few individuals who understood the whole tale, observed, "Man, your parents are wild," without hesitation allowing me to stay on his couch. "I can't believe they just kick you out like that." "It's not like they see it," I murmured, slinking back into the armrest. "In their heads, I am the evil man for not supporting Ryan." Jake shook his head, not even understanding how crazy it would be to expect me to toss aside what I have worked for. "Your mission is not to straighten his life, buddy. That man is a grown man." I nodded, appreciative of the confirmation. He should be the one working out how to pay for his own damn place. Having someone on my side for once felt nice. Over the following week, I concentrated on looking for a place to live. Even with my finances intact, most of the flats I looked at were far outside my means. I'd worked too hard to develop the company capital, so I couldn't bring myself to dig into it. I wasn't willing to let this issue ruin my plans. Finally, I was lucky. On the periphery of town, I came upon a small studio flat. Just one room with a bed, a desk, and a kitchenette. It was not much, but it was inexpensive and mine. It wasn't great, but it was a start. I moved in at the end of the month using what little money I had left after paying the deposit to furnish the place. I thought I was in charge of my own life for the first time in years. There are no guilt trips, no manipulation, no Ryan mooching off of my diligence. Moving into my small studio apartment was a curious mix of feelings. Just me, my aspirations, and the silent will to show to myself, and maybe to them, that I didn't need anybody else to succeed. One hand, I was relieved, free from the continual pressure, guilt-tripping, and anxiety that had seized their house. On the other hand, it seemed nothing. Sure, I owned the area, but it felt lonely. There are no more embarrassing dinners or subtly hostile remarks in the background. Just silence. I lay on the bed for the first several evenings, staring at the ceiling, trying to let things sink in. The world I now live in seemed strange. Not any parents, without a brother, just me, working out life on my own terms. It was terrible as well as empowering in some sense. Right now, I was living alone. From here on out, everything was on me. The first week was about adjusting to and somewhat livability of the place. I had very little, just the minimum I could have carried with me. To get by, I gathered some inexpensive kitchen tools and some secondhand furniture. Though not glitzy, it was mine. I put myself into work and education to be busy, reminding myself every time I looked around that this small area symbolized freedom, even if it came at a great emotional cost. Starting to take up as many extra shifts as I could, my new part-time job paid more than my previous one. Every dollar I made went toward needs including rent. Unless there was a clear emergency, I forbade touching my business savings. Despite all the distractions, my family stayed in the rear of my mind. That money was my ticket to a better future, and nothing else could take it from me. Weeks went by and my parents or Ryan never heard from me. Simply radio silence. No apologies or attempts at reconciliation. Although it wouldn't be accurate, I would say it didn't worry me. A tiny bit of me had hoped that once I went, they would see how unfair they had been and would reach back. They did not, however. It felt as though I had vanished from view when, out of the blue, I received a text. Although the number wasn't saved, from the moment I read it, I knew exactly who it was. "We should have a conversation." It was my dad. I gazed at the message for a long time, trying to figure out how I felt about it. It was time to move past this. Part of me wanted to reply, hear him out, and see whether perhaps, just maybe, this was his method of trying to make things right. Still, another aspect of me knew better. This did not concern writing things. I didn't respond. It was about brushing everything under the floor so they could resume their pretend non-existence. I was not prepared to open that door once more. Not yet. A few days later, Ryan texted me. Though it was far shorter, his message had quite the same impact. "Hope you're pleased. You have destroyed everything." I looked at the words, my chest constricting with indignation and incredulity. Destroyed everything? In what way was this on me? It was he who refused to assume responsibility for his life. He was the one expecting me to give up what I had worked for so he can live comfortably. Still, in his mind, I was the criminal. I never answered him either. There was no reason. Everything I said would simply be another battle, and I was done battling with them. The quiet was fleeting. 1 week later, I received a call from an old family acquaintance. Having not communicated in years, it was surprising to see their name show up on my phone. Though I nearly missed it, curiosity won out, and they began, "Hey, Zach," in a wary tone. "You need to know what your parents have been saying about you. I'm not sure whether I should be sharing this with you." My stomach fell. "What exactly do you mean?" Grabbing the phone tighter, I asked, "They're telling people that you abandoned the family. That Ryan was struggling, and you turned away from helping him. It sounds like you simply left for no reason." I started to feel both depressed and angry. They couldn't tell the truth, of course, that they had kicked me out since I wouldn't give them what they craved. "Thanks for letting me know. No, they had to spin the narrative to make me the bad guy. Try to keep your voice calm." "I appreciate it." After I hung up, I stayed seated for some time trying to digest what I had just heard. It ached, but it was not shocking. My parents had always been really adept at shaping the story. Why should this differ in any way? Though what good would that do? I thought of phoning them and exposing the lies. They would merely be twisting it into something different or denying it altogether. I chose instead to guard myself. I erased their messages, banned their numbers, and turned my attention to moving ahead. That was on them if they intended to propagate falsehoods about me. I wasn't going to let it stop the advancement I had made. The next few weeks were demanding, but also empowering. I immersed myself in my company plans, making every free moment research, network, and find out how to bring my dream to life. I was resolved even though juggling work, education, and my business objectives proved challenging. Though there were times when uncertainty crept in, I felt for the first time in a very long time like I was in charge of my own life. Nights when I lay awake, gazing at the ceiling, and wondered whether I had made the correct decision. Could I have managed things differently? Should I have worked more closely to mend things in my family? Still, I reminded myself of the reason I had gone every time those ideas surfaced. I could not remain in an environment where I was under continual manipulation and taken for granted. My life, my savings, my future, they were mine. And as the weeks stretched into months, life seemed to be more steady. I was not going to allow anyone to take that away from me. My schedule turned into my compass: school, employment, business planning. The little studio apartment that had felt overpowering began to feel like home. Though not much, it was mine. Every morning when I got up, I reminded myself of that. There are no guilt trips, no passive-aggressive remarks, no one on hand to surprise me with demands, just me and my objectives. But my family was always in front of my mind, even as I began to adjust to this new existence. I had banned their numbers, but that did not mean I had forgotten. There were times when I missed them, perhaps not the continual tension, but rather the concept of family, the way it ought to have been. Holidays when we would all laugh around the table, the rare occasions Ryan wasn't the focus of attention, come to mind. Though I wasn't sure it had ever been truly true, I missed that version of us. Still, I knew I couldn't go back. Not without an apology, not without any sort of admission that what they had done was bad. And deep inside, I knew it wasn't forthcoming. When my parents decided Ryan's comfort came first, they had made their decision. My future was secondary. One evening, I got a call from Jake, the friend who had let me rest on his couch when I first left home. "Dude, you're not going to believe this," he began, his voice half laughing, half exasperated. "What's up?" I froze, juggling my phone between my shoulder and ear while I folded laundry. "Your folks stopped by my house." "What? They turned up here yesterday," he added. "Your dad was doing that whole 'we're worried about Zach' act. Your mom looked like she'd been sobbing. What did they say? They asked whether you were all right. They said they hadn't heard from you and were concerned you might be in trouble." I snorted. "Wonderful. Jake kicked me out, I know, man. Still, I kept from them nothing. Just mentioned you were good and left it at that. Thanks," shaking my head. "I appreciate it." Following our hang-up, I spent a lot of time trying to sort through it. Was this only another means of guilting me back into their orbit? Or were they actually worried about me? In any case, I was not chewing. A few weeks later, I received another surprise. I had come too far to allow them to pull me back into that quagmire. This time it came from a letter in the mail. On the envelope, the handwriting was clear, that of my mother. I debated whether to open it for a long period of time. Part of me wanted not to risk becoming caught back in their turmoil. I folded the letter and put it aside. Instead, it was full of nebulous comments on misunderstandings and family coming before conflicts. Though I was not enraged, I was not ready to reply either. Not enough. She had to face what had happened if she wanted to mend a relationship, not ignore it. Life continued to go forward. With my company ambitions, I had begun to really advance, interacting with others online who aligned with my vision, and even locating a couple of mentors ready to support me. Having something wholly mine to work for felt nice, but it returned to haunt me just as I was ready to be free from family conflict. This time, it was via gossip rather than letters or calls. One afternoon, I stumbled upon an old friend from high school in the grocery store. We caught up for a little, but then she said something that made my gut turn over. "So, what's the real story with you and your parents? I heard some intriguing objects." I scowled. "What exactly do you mean?" "Well, someone mentioned you just left since you didn't want to assist Ryan. Like, they made it sound like you abandoned them or something." I felt my jaw contract. "That's not what happened," I insisted forcefully. "They issued an ultimatum. Either leave or give Ryan my savings." She seemed startled when I decided to leave. I remarked, forcing a smile, "Wow, that's not the version I heard." "Yeah, well, people love to twist things." I turned away feeling irritated, but also tired. I shouldn't have been surprised. My parents had always been excellent in crafting the narrative to present themselves as the victims. Still, it hurt to know they were fabricating stories about me. That evening, I sat in my apartment, considering everything. About how far I had come since leaving and how much still I had to go. I considered the letter my mother sent still seated on my desk and the rumors my parents were disseminating. Part of me wanted to face them straight once and permanently set the record clear. But what good would that achieve? They were not going to own their mistakes. And truthfully, I was constructing something for myself. Something they couldn't take away from me. So I didn't need them. My life, my company, my future, all of which belonged to me. And no amount of guilt-tripping or gossip was going to change that. After learning about the rumors my parents were disseminating, I decided not to let their story define me. I was not going to let them take that authority from me anymore. I had spent too much time being the scapegoat, the one expected to fix their mistakes. Their approval, affirmation, or perspective of events clouding my existence did not define it. I was done. Nonetheless, it was difficult to let the resentment go. Every time I considered how they had spun the narrative, I sensed the same old annoyance boiling up. My attention turned entirely to my future, yet I reminded myself of what I had acquired since leaving: peace, control over my life, and the opportunity to pursue my aspirations without continuously staring over my shoulder. The little successes began to mount up. I linked myself with people who shared my company idea by landing a part-time internship linked to it. I researched, networked, worked non-stop to absorb all I could, and polished my ideas. Though occasionally the loneliness crept in, slowly but surely things started to take shape. You could not readily replace family. Some evenings I would sit in my apartment and wonder whether I would ever feel at home again, if I would ever have that strong sense of belonging I used to yearn for once. But then I would remind myself of the price of staying, of what I had already lost by giving them first priority for so many years. Those ideas anchored me and kept me moving ahead. A few months later, I received a call from yet another family friend. Though I nearly missed it, curiosity won me over. "Zach, I'm sorry to bother you," they said, their voice uncertain. "I just ran upon your mother yesterday. She appeared to be quite offended. She said, 'You haven't talked to them in a while.'" I tightened my jaw, ready. "Yeah, we haven't really been in touch. She said she misses you, that they all do." I exhaled slowly. "Did she say anything regarding the reason we aren't talking?" There was a protracted stop. Not precisely. Simply put, there have been some conflicts. That word struck like a gut-reversing blow. It was an ultimatum, not a dispute. Years of favoritism, of being made to feel as though I didn't count until I was sacrificing for someone else. "Thanks for letting me know," I murmured, my voice tight, "but I don't think I'm ready to reach out." They groaned, obviously not knowing how to reply. "I understand it," simply said, "Take care of yourself." Following the call, I spent a lot of quiet time considering everything. The reality was that I loved my parents. I hated Ryan hardly at all, but I could not overlook what they had done, how they had treated me like I was less valuable, less deserving, and the fact that they still couldn't accept it, that they were more concerned with maintaining their image than fixing the damage, made it abundantly evident that I had made the right decision in leaving. Over time, the hurt began to heal. It softened, like an old scar that no longer stung when you touched it, not quite disappeared. I put myself even further into my work, and piece by bit, things started to click. I stopped expecting closure that I knew I would have to find inside myself, and stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. For the first time, I felt like I was creating something real, something totally mine. My company idea took off in ways I hadn't predicted, though it wasn't easy. There were disappointments and sleepless nights and moments of doubt. It was worth it. I surrounded myself with friends who believed in my vision, mentors who pushed me to improve, and even random internet supporters of my path. Months became a year, and these were the individuals who raised me, reminded me I was capable, and that my background determined nothing about me. I came into the letter my mother had sent one day while sorting some old files. Since the day I opened it, I hadn't looked at it, but something caused me to sit down and go over it once more. This time, it did not set me off. All it did made me depressed, though I realized something as I read her words. I no longer needed their validation. Sad for what may have been for the family I had always imagined we could be. I needed them not for understanding or for apologies. I had created something for me that they could not take away. And that was plenty. I never bothered them. Perhaps one day I will, when I feel like I am in a position where their reaction won't cause harm. Possibly I won't as well. In either case, I have come to terms with it. They decided. I decided upon something else. And for the first time in my life, I feel free. Life is not ideal, but it is mine. My small apartment, my expanding company, my dreams, all of which mirror the diligence with which I have worked, and the sacrifices I have made to be on my own 2 feet. And every time I see how far I have gone, I know I made the correct choice, as family is ultimately about relationships, not about blood or responsibility. It concerns love, respect, and encouragement. And I had to give that to myself if they failed to provide it.